All right, let's take one of your most famous products, Dwight Eisenhower.
Oh, you can hardly include him as packaged goods, can you?
Well, what was the philosophy behind the Eisenhower ads? How did you decide to package the general?
Well, I didn't try to package the general. I did not try to put any words in the general's mouth. But the general was a singularly inept speaker. I remember that he had made a big speech in Philadelphia. I went to Philadelphia and heard the speech, and I think he covered 27 different points. And the next morning I had my research crew there, and I discovered that nobody knew what the general had said. He was all over the lot. And so we tried to find out what Eisenhower really stood for. You can't sell 27 things at all. So we selected 3. I wanted to select 1. The Republican National Committee wanted 3. And we picked those 3: corruption in Washington, the higher taxes, and so on and so forth. He was magnificent. Did it all in one day, 44th Street at Transfilm Studios. We thought he would get through 4 commercials in the day, and he cut 35 or 40 in one day.
Did he memorize them?
We had some of the highest-priced art directors in the world who were down on all fours lettering it on cards, and the general would read it once. He was a very fast study, and he played it perfectly.
Eisenhower answers America.
General, both parties talk about bringing down food prices. How do we know which party to believe?
Well, instead of asking what party will bring prices down, why not ask what party put prices up? Then vote for a change.
You know what things cost today. High prices are just driving me crazy.
Yes, my Mamie gets after me about the high cost of living. It's another reason why I say it's time for a change. Time to get back to an honest dollar and an honest dollar's worth.
Eisenhower answers America.
I'm a veteran, General. What's wrong down in Washington? Graft, scandal, headlines. How can you fix it?
Here's how. By your votes, we'll get rid of the people who are too small for their jobs, too big for their britches, too long in power.
And at the end, absolutely exhausted, we were going back to the Commodore Hotel to have a drink. He mopped his brow and says, "Think that an old soldier should come to this."
Didn't you record Eisenhower's answers and then bring in people to ask the questions after they'd been recorded?
Well, as the commercials were written, and the general recorded the answers before we found the people to ask the questions. Yes, that is quite correct.
Eisenhower answers America.
General, if war comes, is this country really ready?
It is not. The administration has spent many billions for national defense. Yet today, we haven't enough planes for the fighting in Korea. It's time for a change.
Where'd you get the people?
The people were picked up, we wanted people from all around the country, and they were taken from tours of Radio City.
Tours of Radio City?
That's correct.
You asked them, are you a farmer? Are you a housewife?
Are you a farmer? And are you interested in Eisenhower? What questions would you ask? And then we'd say, would you ask that question? It was photographed on a separate day, and I don't see any great harm in that, do you?
It was a new technique.
It was the first time that television had ever been used to try it to help a president be elected.
You think it denigrated politics?
No. They were very simplistic commercials. They look almost naive in terms of modern television technique.
And yet a great howl went up about merchandising the presidency.
Well, stop and think. Who remembers? You remember Franklin Delano Roosevelt's inaugural address? People only remember one thing in it. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. There in the middle of an inaugural address was a 5-second spot, and that's all people remember. If you take all of Winston Churchill's great lines, you'll never have so many, owed so much to so few. Does anybody remember the speech in which that was embedded like a little fly in amber? It was a spot. It came out. It's what lingered in the minds of the hearers and in the press. So I simply decided that if that was what democracy is all about, why not tell more people? And I still defend the technique.
But they accused you of introducing the techniques of Madison Avenue into national politics.
It was inevitable that it had to happen. I was merely the first one that did it.
I for president, 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 I for president. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington.
In addition to an advertising budget 10 times bigger than the Democrats, Eisenhower had animation from the Disney studios and the music of Irving Berlin.
The man from Abilene, out of the heartland of America, out of this small frame house in Abilene, Kansas, came a man, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Through the crucial hour of historic D-Day, he brought us to the triumphant peace of VE Day. Now another crucial hour in our history. The nation, haunted by the stalemate in Korea, looks to Eisenhower.
The general who led the Allies to victory in World War II appealed to voters grown weary now of war in Korea and politicians in Washington. His ads offered a commander-in-chief who wouldn't need on-the-job training. He'd already been a leader of men.
I'd rather have a man with a hole in his shoe than a hole in everything he says. I'd rather have a man who knows what to do when he gets to be the prez. I love the governor of Illinois. He is the gov that brings the dove of peace and joy.
The Democrats had Adlai Stevenson of Illinois, but alas, they didn't have the music of Irving Berlin. Stevenson preferred his own lyrics.
We have done what doubters of democracy thought a democracy could not do. We have yielded neither to the hotheads who wanted to extend the war, nor to the weak-kneed who wanted to quit when the going was tough.
Stevenson didn't like television or Madison Avenue slogans. He liked to make speeches and puns. Unfortunately for him, the man who said, "Eggheads of the world, unite, you have nothing to lose but your yolks," had to defend an incumbent Democratic administration that had egg on its face.
Washington, 1952, home of the top-to-bottom mess. Today, all over America, patriotic men and women are jarred by the constant disclosures of graft and bribery in the Washington administration. Shocked by tales of influence peddling.
But the trouble with calling the other fellow a skunk is that sometimes the wind changes.
My fellow Americans, I come before you tonight as a candidate for the vice presidency and as a man whose honesty and integrity has been questioned.
The Republican attack on Democratic corruption almost backfired when Democrats spread stories of a secret trust fund set up for Ike's running mate, Richard Nixon. Party leaders pressured Nixon to resign. Instead, he took his case directly to the voters in a speech broadcast live right after the popular Milton Berle show. The Checkers speech, as it came to be known, got the biggest audience of the campaign and saved Nixon's political career.
I love my country. And I think my country is in danger. And I think the only man that can save America at this time is the man that's running for president on my ticket, Dwight Eisenhower.
Get where we are going, travel day and night for president. Adelaide go the other way, we'll all go with
Ike clinched the election with a last-minute promise to go to Korea, although he never explained what he would do when he got there.
We'll take Ike to Washington, we'll take Ike to Washington.
The Republicans were back in the White House for the first time in 20 years.
The Democratic National Committee presents another visit with the man from Libertyville. Here at the end of this lane, on a farm about 4 miles from Libertyville, lives Adlai E. Stevenson of Illinois.
Take one, track 43.
Now, here's the governor.
In 1956, the Democrats tried to fight the popular man from Abilene with the man from Libertyville. This time, Adlai Stevenson would be just plain folks. He'd even changed his opinion about television, and he told us so.
But you know, it's amazing how many things there are in television that you don't see. But I confess I rather like it. It's wonderful how sitting right here in my own library, thanks to television, I can talk to millions of people that I couldn't reach any other way.
The ads portrayed Stevenson and his running mate, Estes Kefauver, as simple country farmers, standing up for their neighbors.
Most of the key men in the Eisenhower administration are big industrialists. They know big business. They know how to advertise their products. They know even how to advertise their political products. But they don't know much about the farmer's problem.
Meanwhile, Eisenhower's neighbors were speaking up for him.
I always stop when I reach this particular spot. Look over there at that house, where you see the lighted windows. A neighbor of mine lives there. Yep, Dwight D. Eisenhower. A man with the most important job in the world today. What do you suppose he's thinking about over there?
International crises in Hungary and Suez. That's what the president had on his mind. His ads told us he was too busy for politics as usual. Just enjoy your prosperity, they said, while Ike tends the store. And don't forget, he had gone to Korea.
But 4 years ago, it was a different story. 4 years ago, many of our young men were on Heartbreak Ridge in Korea. And that was no game. But what do you say? Are you willing to bet everything you love and hold dear that Stevenson can also keep us out of war? Are you that sure of it?
Eisenhower was so popular that the frustrated Democrats tried to chip away at his pedestal with the new blunt instrument of the negative commercial. They used words written for Ike 4 years earlier by Rosser Reeves.
How's that again, General? During the 1952 campaign, General Eisenhower promised a great crusade.
Too many politicians have sold their ideals of honesty down the Potomac. We must bring back integrity and thrift to Washington.
How's that again, General?
We must bring back integrity and thrift to Washington.
This is Estes Kefauver. That was another promise the general didn't keep.
It didn't work. Many people resented the attacks on their president. So Democrats went after the man who might become president. Eisenhower had suffered a heart attack, and the Democrats asked,
"Nervous about Nixon? President Nixon? Vote Democratic. The party for you, not just the few."
Meanwhile, the philosopher from Libertyville was still trying to prove that he was just one of us.
The Stevensons are returning now from a shopping trip in Libertyville. The governor is helping with the groceries.
Now, most of us don't go grocery shopping in a suit and tie. And doesn't he know the butter is melting? Governor, oh, Governor, don't look now, Governor, but...
Oh, Nancy.
You were a big help, Doc.
Oh, I forgot. I forgot to deliver the groceries and made a speech instead.
Who will you vote for? What's your decision? What do you say?
Me? I like Ike.
Did they like Ike? Once again, he walloped Adlai Stevenson. And after the election, Stevenson proposed that in the future, presidential candidates be given free television time. You can hardly blame him. The Republicans had outspent him at every turn of the dial. Furthermore, Stevenson couldn't get the best guns for hire on Madison Avenue to work for him because of their fear of offending their big business clients. By 1960, 9 out of 10 American homes had television sets, so the need for a more level playing field became more apparent than ever, at least to those on the lower end of it. The ad men were also beginning to fear being branded the new villains of politics and of being on the wrong side of the outcome if a fickle public changed its mind. So they started returning phone calls from Democrats. And the networks, well, they made free airtime available for presidential debates. So politics was ready to move to a brand new stage. You're looking at it right now. He had been considered by many Democrats as too young, too rich, and in too much of a hurry. Television helped him overcome the obstacles, if not the doubts. His spots showed him exchanging views with Americans of all stripes, from classrooms to coal mines. Even the most controversial issue, the one that threatened to cost him the most, he turned to his advantage with ads in which he stood before Protestant audiences to answer questions about his religion.
The question is whether I think that if I were elected president, I would be divided between two loyalties, my church and my state. There is no article of my faith that would in any way inhibit. I think it encourages the meeting of my oath of office.
Kennedy's opponent, Vice President Richard Nixon, did not use television as much in his campaign. Nixon's ads stressed his experience in foreign affairs. Still photographs conveyed a heroic image of the candidate.
Mr. Nixon, What is the truth about our ability to fight the growing menace of communism?
Well, first, we must recognize communism for what it is.
Against the advice of his television experts, Nixon opted for the direct approach in his spots, in part because he thought the public would be turned off by a slick campaign.
That America won't stand for being pushed around anywhere in the world. When Mr. Khrushchev says our grandchildren will live under communism, we must answer his grandchildren will live in freedom.
Kennedy countered with reminders of anti-American demonstrations that occurred when Nixon traveled abroad.
If you believe America's world prestige has gone downhill in these 8 Republican years, vote Kennedy for president.
Kennedy's most effective spot, one used over and over, simply quoted President Eisenhower, who was asked by a reporter to name one major idea of Richard Nixon's that Ike had adopted. Just one.
If you give me a week, I might think of one. I don't remember, because...
Ike's off-the-cuff remark damaged Nixon, but the vice president hurt himself even more in what came to be known as the Great Debate.
Here are some revealing excerpts from the Great Debate.
Well, now let's look at these bills that the vice president suggests were too extreme. One was a bill for $1.25 an hour for anyone...
Appearances were everything. Radio audiences thought Nixon had won the debate, but to TV audiences he seemed nervous and uncomfortable. He had only recently been in the hospital recovering from an illness, and his refusal to wear makeup didn't help his appearance. Kennedy's ad men made the most of it. Spots featuring a shifty-eyed, scowling Nixon appeared right up to Election Day.
Americans want to move ahead with new leadership. Let's elect John F. Kennedy president.
And they did, by just over 100,000 votes.
I know what kind of a dream Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Harry S. Truman and John F. Kennedy would dream if they were here tonight.
Lyndon Johnson was the president in 1964, and his opponent did what challengers usually do. He ran against that mess in Washington.
Graft. Swindles. Juvenile delinquency. Hear what Barry Goldwater has to say about our lack of moral leadership.
We, as a nation, are not far from the kind of moral decay that has brought on the fall of other nations and people.
In a television campaign that relied on half-hour speeches, Barry Goldwater painted a civilization on the verge of collapse, morally bankrupt at home, and threatened by a creeping communist menace abroad. Goldwater called for action.
I want American kids to grow up as Americans, and they will, if we have the guts to make our intentions clear. So clear they don't need...
But the central issue of the campaign, exploited by the Democrats, soon became Barry Goldwater's own intentions.
In your heart, you know he's right.
Democratic spots portrayed Goldwater as too far to the right of mainstream America. Their ammunition had been handed them by a bitterly divided Republican Party.
I don't know just why they wanted to call this a confession. I certainly don't feel guilty about being a Republican.
Lyndon Johnson was asked if he shouldn't label Goldwater an extremist. No, said the president. Moderate Republicans had done that for him.
I voted for Dwight Eisenhower the first time I ever voted. I voted for Nixon the last time. But when we come to Senator Goldwater, now it seems to me we're up against a very different kind of a man.
Barry Goldwater said, "Sometimes I think this country would be better off if we could just saw off the eastern seaboard and let it float out to sea."
Even his running mate, William Miller, admits that Senator Goldwater's voluntary plan would destroy your Social Security.
But the president did want to remind voters that Senator Goldwater had talked loosely about tactical nuclear weapons. After Goldwater had cracked that maybe we ought to lob one into the men's room of the Kremlin, bumper stickers said, "In your heart, you know he might." This spot never even mentioned Goldwater by name, but proved to be one of the most controversial in the history of advertising.
7, 6, 6, 8, 9, 9.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
For President Johnson on November 3rd, the stakes are too high for you to stay home.
I'm Ronald Reagan. Every American should hear what Barry Goldwater really has to say, not what a bunch of distorters of the truth would have you believe.
The actor Ronald Reagan came riding to Barry Goldwater's defense in one of his first nationally televised speeches. But neither he nor other Republicans could save the Goldwater campaign.
Our opponents are referring to us as warmongers. Well, Barry, in my mind, this is actual Tommy rot.
Even the beloved Ike couldn't help. Johnson won by a landslide.
Yes, Ford has made me feel proud to be an American. I think he's done a wonderful job for America. I'm feeling good about America. I'm feeling good about me.
If you were to take a candidate and let him stand on the most crowded corner in the world and shake hands with one person every 10 seconds, he couldn't shake hands in the whole campaign with a fraction of the people that will see one commercial where he can talk to them in their home directly and in a very modest way tell them something for 30 seconds or 60 seconds as opposed to shaking hands and not saying anything for 10 seconds.
I want a chance to give back to you the security and the hopes for tomorrow that inflation is stealing from you. With your help, we can do it. You can depend on it.
The campaign takes place in the living room now.
Not on the street.
Not on the street. And we're not interested in public speaking. We're interested in private speaking. I think that people know much more about candidates today than they did in the past.
And the commercials have been able to accomplish that education?
I think they're an important part of it. You know, people will say that, why can't we use the news and the discussion shows and the free media? You find then that the candidate loses control of his own campaign. He goes with what the interest of the newscaster is. He has to have control of his campaign. If he has the proper balance of his paid media, of the media he determines about himself. And isn't that what free speech means?
With the use of political commercials, does the best man win or the most telegenic?
I don't think it's either. You know, people will come to me and say, are you sure you work for the right candidate? You're a very powerful person in this realm. And I say that's an undemocratic question. The right candidate is not for me to decide. It's for the voters to decide.
You and I as voters also have to decide what we think of political spots. I'm ambivalent myself. I don't buy the argument that they undermine democracy. In a way, they serve democracy by reaching more people in a single instant than a whistle-stop campaign ever could, or a speech on the stump. When William Jennings Bryan was running for president, his speeches sometimes lasted 3 hours. Imagine him trying that on a television audience that's come to expect fast relief. One thing to be said for political spots is that they enable candidates to choose their message on their terms. The politician is not left to the mercy of newspaper editors or television producers looking for that 10-second excerpt that fits the reporter's script. The fact is, candidates can say a lot in 30 seconds that they think a voter should know about them or their opponents, and I'm not worried that they'll carry the day. No spot has the last word. We have news reports, the opposition's campaign, other publications, and our own common sense against which to measure its claims. That's one reason viewers have learned to take much of what they see in commercials, political or otherwise, with a grain of salt. Even so, if political spots don't undermine democracy, they trivialize its conversation. They reduce issues to black and white. They're frequently vague, and they can be misleading, deliberately or unwittingly. That 1964 Daisy commercial, for example, was intended to make people think about the urgency of controlling nuclear weapons and to remind them of Lyndon Johnson's prudence. It wasn't meant to make you think Barry Goldwater wanted to blow up little children. Yet although Goldwater's name was never mentioned, that's how a lot of people interpreted the ad. Furthermore, the Daisy Spot is a classic example of how emotional ads in politics can be irrelevant to government. Nuclear responsibility is an issue in every election. But in 1964, the issue that should have been debated openly and candidly was what were we going to do about Vietnam? It haunts me all this time later that Lyndon Johnson was portrayed as the peacemaker in that campaign and Barry Goldwater the warmonger, but it was LBJ who, after his re-election, committed the country to a long, bloody war in Vietnam that eventually we lost. If my memory is correct, we never touched on Vietnam in any of the political spots in 1964. Political advertising tends to be an expensive and amusing sideshow to the real business of government, one more diversion in the theater of entertainment we all now live in. So I come down believing we have to keep looking for alternatives to carry on the political conversation of America, using television because it's here to stay, but using it in a way that does justice to the ideas and serious purpose of the men and women who run, and to the responsibility of all of us who must weigh what they say and act on it. I'm Bill Moyers.
General, both parties talk about bringing down food prices. How do we know which party to believe?
Well, instead of asking what party will bring prices down, why not ask what party put prices up? Then vote for a change.
I want a chance to give back to you the security and the hopes for tomorrow that inflation is stealing from you. With your help, we can do it. You can depend on it.
Trust is leveling with the people before the election about what you're going to do after the election. It's not enough for anyone to say, trust me, trust must be earned.
This is a great country, but I think it could be a greater country. And this is a powerful country, but I think it could be a more powerful country.
This is your first vote. And years from now, I just hope you can all look back and say it was one of your best votes. Thank you.